11 horror franchises that tried to reinvent themselves. That is the title of today's discussion, and we know that horror movies have been a major part of the cinema for decades now. They have some of the most loyal fans who get into heated debates but keep it friendly about which movies they think are the best. And with Evil Dead Rise coming out this week, I thought it would be a good idea to look at the horror movie franchises that looked to try and do something different with their tried and tested formula. Some of them have been good, some of them have been bad. But let's have a look and see what ones we think are going to make the list. This is not a ranking list, as I always mention. This is just 11 subject matters that we're going to talk about. There's a few cheats along the way, but we'll get to that. So without further ado, here are 11 horror franchises that tried to reinvent themselves. Number 1. The Evil Dead. The Evil Dead was first released in 1981 by Sam Raimi, and it has the amazing ability to bring gore and comedy together and making Ash Williams one of the household horror names. Bruce Campbell had remained attached to this character and has become a cult favourite in the horror world. And when we look at, just to start with, the Sam Raimi side of it, we have the first Evil Dead, a low-budget movie that took a lot of commitment to make with the gore, which is fine. It's so popular, we're not going to discuss qualities. Evil Dead 2 leaned more into the comedy and let Bruce Campbell take it even more centre stage with the wacky battles against the Deadites. However, it is in Army of Darkness that we took the franchise in a completely different direction. This involved a bit of time travel back to medieval times, where the fight against the Deadites continued. Years after that movie, we then did get a TV spin-off where we had Ash vs. the Evil Dead, which seemed to come back full circle to what Evil Dead 2 gave us. However, in 2013, Sam Raimi helped produce a reimagining of the Evil Dead, with Uruguayan director Fede Alvarez taking the director's chair, along with an outstanding special effects team. They brought us a much more graphic, modernised look at gore, stripping away any comedy that we had previously seen in the more recent franchise, and what we get is one of the most visceral, blood-soaked movies of anything. This reinvented what The Evil Dead was, grabbing a new audience and getting positive reviews across the critical board. And while we're not going to get into my personal feelings, they took something very comedic and they went serious gore, and it's a big commitment to what they did with this movie. Number 2, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven is one of the greatest minds of horror, who helped bring to life two of the biggest franchises in horror history, A Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream. The former is the one we're going to talk about most, with the original Nightmare on Elm Street focused on a serial killer, Freddy Krueger, hunting teenagers in their dreams. While Wes was only involved in one other movie in the franchise, and it's also the popular Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, it is the new Nightmare that we're going to have the most attention. In New Nightmare, Wes Craven returned to writing and directing the 7th movie in the franchise. This time, Freddy has started haunting the actors who appeared in the original movie. We get Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, and even Wes Craven himself all playing themselves, being hunted down by Freddy, who is trying to escape into the real world, taking Freddy in a completely different direction. The Nightmares have moved away from the exclusivity of hunting teenagers too, and then we also lost the humour, which had become a big part of the franchise as the years went by. This was a strange one because the success and reviews and feedback for this movie was really good. It helped bring in a more self-aware series of horrors, which Wes Craven had previously dipped his toes into with The People Under the Stairs. But the franchise then got caught up in a battle with Jason in Freddy vs. Jason, returning to the comedy side of things. Add in the poorly received remake, we don't hear much about this franchise, and it is a shame because when it did decide to take that step outside of the normal, it seemed to be the thing that helped usher in the much more popular franchise now of Scream. Number 3 is Child's Play. Child's Play was the brainchild of Don Mancini. It follows a serial killer who is trying to move his soul from a good guy doll into a human again. While Child's Play 1 and 3 are entertainment slashers in their own right, the franchise went through many transformations. Bride of Chucky and Seed and Chucky gave us a much more embraced comedy approach, and it gets to address a lot of subjects that weren't getting touched by any other horror movie at the time. This included Chucky and Tilly having a transgender child, which at the time would have been something that doesn't really ever get talked about now unless you're one of the people talking about the Chucky movies. And the comedy side of these movies did breed and bring in a brand new audience. However, it was Curse of Chucky and Cult of Chucky that stepped back into a more serious, pure horror side of things, and the transformation of Don Mancini's franchise for popularity for years and years and years. And we also get to see how this has affected people who were behind the scenes, as we've recently had the documentary Living with Chucky, directed by the daughter of one of the special effects artists who had to give up time to make these Chucky movies. But moving away from the Don Mancini side of things, we had a 2019 reimagining by the studio who wanted to make some money. And in this movie, we get to see Chucky as an AI doll that has become evil because of its programming and will go on a rampage to defend its owner. While the movie itself is not terrible, it felt like it just used the name to create something that would draw the audience, and we have recently seen a movie called Megan that did this in a much better and original way. So that was how Child's Play tried to reinvent itself, by trying to change the whole main killer from a serial killer to a robot. Yes, not the best, but again, we're not here for quality. Number 4 is Alien and Predator, and we are going to break this down into Alien first, then Predator, and the main reason for this is because they end up clashing eventually. We'll get to that. But Alien is one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies ever made. The money it made, that we were going to get a sequel eventually, but the question was, how were you going to do this? Well, the godfather of the box office, James Cameron, decided he was going to think of an idea. And instead of just having the crew fighting against an alien on a small ship, he transformed the concept into Aliens, an action horror sci-fi, seeing a group of mercenaries investigating an abandoned colony, but they soon find themselves fighting off countless aliens, and Ripley returns to battle against an alien queen. Now, there's no denying that Alien to Aliens was one of the biggest transformations in any franchise we've ever seen. And the fact that they are both considered two of the greatest really helps the argument. However, over the years, we had Alien 3 or Cubed and Alien Resurrection that used the same formula, which was fine. They weren't as good a quality. They have the fans, they have the haters. It was deciding to mix the franchise up with Predator that got to be a little bit more interesting. We got a much more chaotic environment of seeing how they could be anywhere in the world or the universe. So those movies, we'll go more into the Predator side of that as we get there. But for Aliens, the biggest transformation was probably with Prometheus, when we looked to dive deeper into the origins of the xenomorphs as they looked to uncover the origin of mankind. This offered up a much more interesting discussion when we get to the home planet, and we get to understand a lot more of what was going on throughout the franchise. Moving on to Predator, we get the small group of soldiers coming up against an unknown hunter in the jungle, and they start hunting him down with advanced weaponry and technology, and we get to see who is a worthy winner. On surface, this keeps everything action-packed and helped continue the rise of Arnold Schwarzenegger. While Predator 2 moved things into the concrete jungle, it did follow the same formula, which was fine. But then we did get the big hint of a joint universe. As previously mentioned, we were going to look at Alien vs Predator more, and the Predator side of the thing is when things start to change more, because we get to see how these hunters are created to be more organised, and how they want to take down different species in the universe. And that's what we like to see. And it's almost turned the Predators into the heroes of this battle, which was a strange twist to make these seemingly blood-hungry, serial-killing monsters. And as we've seen throughout most of the Predator movies, there's been an added idea that the military government know that the Predators are here and want the technology. With this in mind, the Predator commits fully to this experience and adding different types of Predators to the battle. But we had a formula that was going a bit stale because it's all about the government side of things there. The movie was received really badly. But in 2022, we went back to the origins of what made this interesting with Prey, which reversed the concept back to seeing a Comanche nation going in battle against a predator, and what we see is a young hunter learning how to hunt, and it felt like the predator was learning like what Earth was like to hunt in, and this felt like a real big reinvention of this franchise, taking us to an era that we wouldn't have seen or even expected to see a predator in, and it brought so much more life into this franchise that people were wanting more. Number 5 is Wrong Turn. When Robert Smith's Wrong Turn first got released, I doubt many people expected it to turn into a 7-movie franchise. It follows a group of friends that get lost in the middle of the woods and they get picked off by cannibals. While the franchise did start to lean into more identifying who the cannibals were and seeing how they operated over years, the basic formula tended to stay the same, whether it be prequels or sequels. It was always about the world building for the cannibals. In 2021, the original writer Alan B. McCauley returned with a new vision. While things start the same, a group of friends meet a strange group in the woods known as the Foundation. The community is more operational and welcomes people in and kills outsiders. This does bring us a couple of disturbing sequences, especially with the one involving the dark, but most importantly, it moved away from what you would consider the blood-hungry cannibals to more of a sophisticated group surviving in the woods via cannibalism. It was a brave move to try and change how The Wrong Turn had been getting received, and while I had an opinion that I liked the movie, we didn't seem to ever go anywhere with any potential sequels, but we did seem to end the blood-hungry, like slightly mutated cannibals that we were getting previously. Six is The Purge. In 2013, James DeMonaco's The Purge came out with the great concept for a horror movie. All crimes are legal for 12 hours, and we follow a family trying to shelter in their own home. We see that they are surviving the situation with advanced home security, while the chaos goes on outside, and with another group trying to get into the house, making it much more of a home invasion movie. And that was pretty much the core of the movie. That success led us to a movie 1 year later with The Purge Anarchy. In this movie we get to see things from the outside, meaning we get to see how people approach the night, with some enjoying it, others looking for vengeance, and others just trying to survive without the money that they could have had for the best security systems. This is just the beginning of the changes the franchise undertook, and it stepped into a more pure action world, as we added a lot more of a political motivation to the night and the concept. In the first purge, we even get to go back to the very first experiment of the night, where we get to see how one small contained city got to do these crimes, and how the world received it, while the Forever Purge decided that people got bored of the rules being 12 hours and created a chaotic world. All of these have gone from a simple home invasion movie into a political action horror movie that asks bigger questions about the morality of people who could do illegal behaviours if it was legal for a certain time. And it's very interesting that we went from such a small home invasion movie to something this big over the years. Number 7 is I Know What You Did Last Summer. And I Know What You Did Last Summer and I Still Know What You Did Last Summer are very similar movies, as they follow the group of friends trying to hide the truth of an incident from the summer before, but a serial killer, slasher, or somebody has come back to hunt them down to make them pay. And while the movies weren't received very well at all by the original author of the novels, they are what you would call typical late 90s slasher movies. However, in 2006, Sylvan White decided to use the name to bring us a fresh story to the table with I'll Always Know What You Did Last Summer. In this movie, we see a group of friends that witnessed a friend die in a prank accident. 1 year later, they start getting picked off, and everything seems like something we would imagine a typical slasher cash-in sequel, etc., etc. But sadly, this movie does something very dramatic with what we get to see, and that's where the big reinvention, and I would like to put in the word disappointment, comes. It makes the villain a spirit tracking them down instead of a human enemy, and completely killed the franchise. And it's only recently that we've even started to talk about a potential reboot or remake. Maybe one a bit closer to the novel would be received well by some of the fans, but deciding to take a slasher who is generally a human and turning him into a ghost that you can't just stop, which is the whole point of this, is very disappointing. Number 8 is Halloween, probably the one with the most reinvention attempts. In 1978, one of the greatest horror movie directors gave us this little movie Halloween. John Carpenter was always going to be one of the stars of this world, and this is considered one of the greatest of all times for a reason. But it gave birth to a franchise and has reboots, twists, turns, and everything that we just don't really need to see. It starts with Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, which goes back to the original idea behind the branding Halloween, where John Carpenter wanted to bring a different story to life each year after being forced into making Halloween 2, where he did end up killing Michael Myers and Dr. Loomis off to stop being forced into it. Where Season of the Witch was just another idea of a scary story, the branding decided to reinvent everything we were going to see. And it has gone on to become a cult favourite. But that didn't stop people trying to reinvent the Halloween franchise because of how iconic Michael Myers had become. We ended up jumping into Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, and Dr. Loomis fighting Michael Myers. And we get into this weird cult idea that Michael has to do something before being able to get freed. And while they are just standard movies, the idea that they tried to rebirth this franchise without even bringing Laurie back was very strange, and it ended with the sad passing of Donald Pleasence, so we couldn't continue with this story, which also explains why the sixth one is pretty much a mess when it comes to the ending because of all the studio interference. That didn't end things though. We've already mentioned that a lot. And we're going to get our first attempt at a legacy sequel that wasn't called a legacy sequel, and that's Halloween H2O, 20 years later, which saw Jamie Lee Curtis return as Laurie Strode, despite the other movies telling us she was dead. Anyway, now she has her own family, and Michael's found her, and while this is perfectly passable for a slasher movie, it is once again one that goes to kill off Michael in a very clear way that he cannot return. But we got Halloween Resurrection, which then killed this attempt at the franchise, even killing Laurie Strode in the opening sequence. So now we've killed Laurie twice, Michael twice, without it being shot and he got up and walked away, and Dr. Loomis has died once. Fine. But we're still yet to finish where we're going with this. We end up going back to a remake. Yes, this was when all of the horror movies were getting remade, and they were trying to do something very different. We saw Nightmare on Elm Street fail to grab the audience, Friday the 13th get very mixed reports, and Rob Zombie gave us his Halloween, where it was a much more violent slasher movie, which I think is one that turned people away, because we went from quite a suspenseful movie to an all-out chaotic, violent, gore-filled movie that looked to dive into Michael and understanding why he was as violent as he was. And when we got to Halloween 2 that Rob Zombie directed, we go in an even stranger way, which again, at least it was brave enough to try something different, but alas, that was the end of this version of Halloween. Amazingly enough, this is not the end of the story when we get what they call the first official legacy sequel, because everybody was doing legacy sequels during the 2010s, and Halloween is here, and it has erased every movie that has happened in the Halloween franchise except the original. And now we get to see how Laurie has lived her life and had a family, but still is in constant fear of Michael escaping, and he does escape, and we get a little trilogy. And well, the first one got a lot of praise due to a few real world problems. The idea of what they wanted was 3 movies over one night had to be tinkered and changed, and while Halloween Kills did continue the same night, creating a mob mentality against the monster, it is Halloween Ends that really tested the audience and created a massive debate in the horror community with how they tinkered with the franchise's formula by having a character seemingly becoming possessed by Michael and going on a killing rampage because he was considered a monster for an accident that had happened in the town. Well, there are some very interesting discussion points about whether this is good or bad. I think a lot of people were left very disappointed with what we ended up getting, and we were all kind of expecting to see more, because we ended up resorting to Michael versus Laurie anyway, so the whole side story didn't feel like it got flushed out enough. But it was a way to it shows how this franchise has constantly tried to reinvent itself and never really got very far with it. Number 9 is Urban Legends. Urban Legend is another little small trilogy of horror movies that look to grab the slasher subgenre, which was the late 90s hottest prospect in the horror world. And this one starts off simple enough with the idea of a group of students being picked off by different urban legends. And the sequel, Urban Legend Final Cut, continues that. And they work quite well if you're just a slasher fan. They're not going to break any walls down like Scream at the time, but they're fine. They're entertaining, and they're using the urban legends quite clever. However, when it came to Urban Legends Bloody Mary, somehow the original Pet Sematary director Mary Lambert brought us something very different and dumped the slasher side of the movie and going into a supernatural side of things where it just didn't seem to click in any of the same way. And by the time this movie finished, we weren't getting any more urban legend movies, which is disappointing because, as we've mentioned, urban legends can be used endlessly for horror. and they were used very effectively for certain kill scenes in the other movies. And even in this movie there are some good urban legend scenes, but it wasn't a human doing it, which was why it was quite twisted in the first two movies. And they've even the end of Urban Legend Final Cut teased at who could be the villains in the third movie. But we just dumped it off for some ghost doing it, which again is very disappointing. Number 10 is Leprechaun. Leprechaun started out as a small family discovering a pot of gold that ends up getting an evil leprechaun coming after them in what is quite a fun little horror comedy with a very fresh-faced Jennifer Aniston in. And we get a couple of movies that are kind of following on that trend afterwards, but Leprechaun became the movie that learnt how to jump the shark quite quickly. First we got Leprechaun 4 in space, which has become the running joke of horror movies now. Will they just throw them into space at some point? This did follow in the footsteps of Critters 4, but Critters 4 and the Critters franchise, they are about alien-like creatures, so we won't say that one is too much of reinventing a franchise, but taking it to a new world. And we did end up seeing some other movie follow it. Friday the 13th did it with Jason X, which is completely bonkers. Jason in space. Whatever. It worked for the craziness. But Leprechaun didn't finish with just the space movies. It went on to return to Earth with Leprechaun in the Hood and Leprechaun Back to the Hood, where he ended up fighting pimps and gangsters in the comedy elements thriving. And the idea that this little family being haunted has gone on to become one of these stick it into the most randomly weird situation has made what we get to see today by the bonkers reinventions of movies as one of the ones that led the way in it. And we ended up returning with Leprechaun Returns to the roots, where we just get to keep it simple again. And even though we don't really get any more from this franchise, this is a franchise that has constantly tried to reinvent itself with something completely outside the box. Number 11 is Saw. James Wan gave us Saw, which took everyone with a massive amount of shock with the twist ending and the idea that a jigsaw person puts people in traps that they must escape with an element of punishment to themselves to understand what it means to keep living. While Saw kept everything contained and we didn't really know who the killer was until the very end, because we only knew as the tricycle riding masked doll, Jigsaw, we didn't know who the man or woman behind it was. Saw 2 started to open the world up, and as we know who the real Jigsaw is after the end of the first Saw, over the franchise we get to learn how he has created apprentices that work with John Kramer, the original Jigsaw. However, they don't seem to completely understand the rules, and by this we get to see how people were made to suffer without a chance to escape the traps. It isn't until Saw the final chapter that the franchise felt complete along the way. We see the games turned into other people's choices of who survives, which was everything against what John wanted with his concept. But then that's just how the story went. We get to dive into how the killers' mindsets were created, even having police figures involved. But then we ended up getting Jigsaw, which looked a lot more at fan love for what he was doing, with seeing church worship things, which we later see get borrowed by Scream 6, about how people thought the killer was interesting to study. And while the movie itself is looking at the people who could become apprentices in their own minds rather than through John, it is then spiral from the Book of Saw that we get to take things to another level, where we dive deeper into police investigation side of things with a Chris Rock, Samuel L. Jackson led movie in the Saw franchise trying to recreate something. And the idea was more about people wanting to follow in the footsteps without any previous connection to Jigsaw, using the Twisted games for their own twisted pleasures. And this attempt at a reboot got very mixed reviews, and we haven't really gone back since. In fact, this last time we heard anything, they were remaking another John Kramer Jigsaw movie. So that is that. So that is 11 horror movie franchises that tried to reinvent themselves. Let me know if you feel I could have included some others below. I have had a few suggestions which I didn't select myself, but I would like to hear what everyone else has to say. So feel free to leave comments below and see whether we can bring together another crazy wild list, because they are always fun to make. Thank you and goodbye.